You know, people think differently about debt, and some are more willing to take on debt than others. And I've got really two stories that kind of illustrate both extremes. When I wrote my first book, Master Your Money, I wrote a chapter on buying automobiles, and I put in there that the cheapest car you'll ever own is the car that you presently have, and if you're going to buy a new car, then pay cash for it and drive it for at least 10 years. If you're looking at a car as an economic decision, that's the advice that I would give. And I was visiting with a client of mine, and he was a businessman. He lived in Texas, and he was telling me what his plans were. He was going to be buying a Mercedes, and I said, really? I said, tell me about it. And he said, well, you know, because I'm in business, I can write off my payments. I get depreciation on the Mercedes, and I get all these tax benefits from buying that Mercedes. And I said, really? I said, how much is it going to cost you? And I think it was $40,000 or $50,000. It's been a number of years ago. And he said, well, they'll loan me 100% of the value of the car to do it, and then I write off all that interest also, which at that time you could do that. And I said, well, you know, you tend to make a better decision when you pay cash for something. I said, I don't mind you driving a Mercedes, that's not the issue. Just recognize that you're probably driving that Mercedes because it's satisfying some ego need. And I said it in such a way that he didn't get offended. So I said, here's my only piece of counsel. I said, buy the Mercedes, but pay cash for it. And his response was, well, I can't afford that. I said, you're right. You can't afford that. Because of debt, many times we take on obligations that we really can't afford. But it feels like we can afford it because we can afford the payments for it. Now, on the other end of the story is a story of the Correct Craft boat people. Correct Craft boats, they're the ones that make a ski nautique. They were the original ski boats. In fact, they invented, Mr. Maloon invented water skiing, the father of the person I'm going to tell you about. But during World War II, Correct Craft boats made all of the landing craft for the invasion on D-Day. And it's through something that happened, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the government ended up not paying for those boats. And so the company ended up declaring bankruptcy. And when they declared bankruptcy, they did it in the court. And the court, what they do in bankruptcy, they adjust all of the debts. And so what happened was that Correct Craft was able to continue the business because now all of the debt obligations that they had, and they had no obligation to pay this debt back. The courts had said, you don't have to do that. But Walt and Ralph Maloon, who were the brothers that were running the company at the time, did not feel morally right with that. They felt like they needed to pay back all of that debt. And they spent the next 25 years paying back 100% of everything that they had been freed from. The last payment that they made was to a lady who was, her husband had been a manufacturer of something to do with wood boats prior to World War II. Well, now they've become fiberglass boats. That company had gone out of business. This lady was in the hospital dying. She had no money to pay her medical bills, and they found her, paid the debt that they had, which paid her medical bills. Now, that's a remarkable story, but here's what's more remarkable. I was with Ralph Maloon not long ago. Ralph is now well over 90 years old, and Ralph told a story at a conference that I had sponsored, that in order to pay back those debts, Ralph and his family, I don't remember how many children he had, 3 or 4 children, they lived in a tent for 5 years in order to be able to save the money to pay back the people that they owed. 2 diametrically opposed thoughts relative to borrowing money. You know, I just can't even imagine what Ralph and his family went through living in a tent for 5 years. But God has honored them so well. This company has done extraordinarily well. Ralph is one of the most pleasant, delightful people. Every now and then I'll get a call from Ralph. Just wants to talk, just wants to say hello. So I look forward to those phone calls.